Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. This is again Dr. Muhammad Shafiq, lecturer of Department of Islamic and Pakistan Studies. The course I'm teaching is called Introduction to Logic. The course code is PHI 101 and this is lecture number 14. Today we are going to discuss what is fallacy, what does fallacy mean, and what are the different kinds of fallacies. So let's move on to the topic, what does fallacy mean? Sometimes an argument seems to be valid and sound, but in reality it is not so. It involves a violation of some rule of logic which is not apparent and which can be detected only when closely examined. Such a piece of unsound reasoning is called fallacy. When the premise of an argument fails to support its conclusion, we call the argument a fallacious argument. So a fallacy is an argument which appears to be valid apparently, but in fact it is not, and which can mislead us. And as we know, the whole purpose of this logic is to study those methods and principles which distinguish between correct reasoning and incorrect reasoning. So if we study those methods and principles which identifies the correct reasoning, at the same time it is very important to know those rules and principles which also identify incorrect reasoning. So in logic we use the term fallacy in very narrow sense when we call it a typical error that is made in reasoning. In this sense, each fallacy is a type of incorrect argument. We call the argument committing fallacy in which such kind of mistake is made, and different arguments can commit same fallacy, and the argument which commits a fallacy is itself fallacy because it is an example of the typical mistake. Now, another thing should be noted that a fallacy may be committed unintentionally or intentionally. When committed unintentionally, it is called paralogism, while committed intentionally, it is called sophism. One would question why someone would commit it intentionally. Just because people always try to deceive other people, and they play with the words and they use these kind of fallacies to deceive others. So this kind of fallacy which is intentionally committed is called sophism. On the other hand, paralogism, if the paralogism person committing fallacy himself is not aware, while in sophism, sophism is a kind of fallacy which is implied with the intention in order to deceive or mislead someone. However, a fallacy, whether committed intentionally or unintentionally, is fallacy. So the fallacy, the study of fallacy enables us to avoid these and fulfill the purpose of logic, which is differentiate between correct and incorrect reasoning. We understood after studying these fallacies what the valid thinking or reasoning is. We recognize sound arguments and unsound arguments and the conditions for valid reasoning. Even when we we are tricked by an invalid argument, we wish to be able to show how we are tricked by it. If we are just able to see it and not solve the problem, our mind is unable to proceed, as Aristotle would say. Hence, it is necessary to study the fallacies. We can avoid these fallacies when understand the kinds of reasoning mistakes made by different arguments. Therefore, we need to understand the different kinds of fallacies and different classes of fallacies. So, for this convenience purposes, philosophers and logicians have classified these fallacies into uh, four classes, and we are going to examine these four classes one by one. So the first one the classification of fallacies. Informal fallacies are numerous. Here, hence these are grouped into categories with clear identifiable features. Although there is a difference among philosophers about this classification, but it is important for understanding to classify these into different groups. This classification of fallacies is a controversial matter in logic, as I already said that there are difference of opinions among the philosophers and logicians about this classification. But still they have proposed lists of fallacies that vary greatly in length. Different sets have been specified and different names have been given to these fallacies. But the important classes which have been identified by this different philosophers and logicians are as follows. So the first class or group of fallacies is called fallacies of relevance. Fallacies of relevance basically are all those arguments uh, which depict irrelevance between their premise and conclusion. When the premise claims something else and conclusion says something else. Fallacies of relevance are the most numerous and very common and frequently used. In these fallacies, premise of the argument are simply not relevant to the conclusion. However, because they are made to appear to be relevant, hence they may deceive us. So there are 5 types of fallacies of relevance. Of course, which we will discuss in detail in our next lecture, because these are very important to be understood. But here I will just give you a kind of idea. There are 5 fallacies of relevance in number. The first one is called appeal to emotion, and this is the fallacy of relevance in which an argument relies upon emotions rather than ground realities. Hence it is called appeal to emotion. Another fallacy of relevance is appeal to pity. Again, as it is evident from its name, this is a kind of argument in which the reliance is upon pity rather than ground realities or reason. Or it is again a kind of appeal to emotion, but particularly concentrates upon emotion of pity. The third one is called appeal to force, and this is the kind of argument in which generally focuses upon force rather than reasoning or logic. The fourth one, argument against person, that is basically kind of argument when the respondent, instead of giving a reasonable answer to the argument or question tries to attack the personality of the arguer. So in this kind of fallacy, the target is the personality rather than using reasoning to respond to the question. And the fifth, the last one of fallacies of relevance is called irrelevant conclusion. Although all of these fallacies have irrelevance between premise and conclusion, but this fifth is particularly focused upon that kind of fallacy in which the point is basically the the main point is missed, and the link which is between the premise and conclusion is not taken into consideration. Hence, this kind of fallacy is called missing the point or ignoratio elenchi as well. So these are the 5 types of this class of fallacies of relevance, called fallacies of ambiguity. Again, these are the kind of arguments in which contain the ambiguous terms or phrases in their premise or conclusions. And that's why these are called fallacies of ambiguity, because they are the product or they are the result of losing ambiguous language in an argument. Again, these are also 5 in number, and we will discuss these into detail in our next coming lectures. Here I will just give you kind of idea, and we need to discuss these in details in next lecture because these are very important fallacies. So these are 5 in number. The number 1 is called equivocation, and this is a kind of fallacy in which certain terms and phrases are used which have more than one meaning, and they might create some ambiguity in the argument and try to mislead us. The second one is called Amphiboli. Again, this is the kind of fallacy in which a term is or a phrase is used in a different sense due to the order of the words or punctuation marks, which can obviously change the whole meaning of the phrase or statement and also can mislead us. The third one is called fallacy of accent, as it is evident from its title again. It is normally committed during the verbal argument because accent is always matters in verbal argument. So using different kind of accent or stressing upon different terms or phrases can also change the meanings and can lead us to kind of this fallacy. And the fourth one is fallacy of composition, while the fifth one division. So these two, composition and division, are basically the converse fallacies, converse to each other. The composition is the fallacy or in which the attributes of parts are taken for the attributes of whole, while on the other hand, in fallacy of division, the attributes of whole are assigned to the attributes of parts. So these are the 5 types of 5 kinds of this class of fallacy, which is called fallacy of ambiguity. We'll discuss these in third class of fallacies, which have been classified by the logicians and philosophers, are called fallacies of defective induction. In fallacies of defective induction, which are also very common, the mistake arises from the fact that premise of the argument, although relevant to the conclusion, are so weak and ineffective that relying upon such premises is just like committing a blunder, because they are so weak that we cannot obviously rely upon such kind of premises, which also leads to weaken the argument rather than supporting the conclusion. So these are also again four in number. The fallacies of defective induction. The first one is called argument from ignorance. The second one is appeal to inappropriate authority. The third one is called the false cause, and the fourth one is called hasty generalization. So these are the four types of fallacies of defective induction. The fourth class of the fallacies is presumption. All those arguments in which the premise rely upon too many assumptions, the conclusion is drawn from these assumptions are called fallacies of presumption. In fallacies of presumption, too much is assumed in premises. The inference to the conclusion depends mistakenly on these unwarranted assumptions. And these kind of fallacies are also distinguished, and these are three in number. And number one is called the accident fallacy of assumption. The second one is called the complex question, and the third one is called the begging the question. So these are the four classes of different kinds of fallacies. About fallacies of relevance and fallacies of ambiguity, we are going to discuss individually in our next coming lectures because they are very important. But this does not necessarily mean that fallacies of presumption and fallacies of defective induction are by any means less important. But ambiguity and relevance kind of fallacies are normally used in our daily lives very frequently. Hence, we need to concentrate more upon these two classes of fallacies, and we'll discuss these in our next coming lectures. So, for the time being, we just need to concentrate that we all survive to reason correctly. So one of the central tasks of logic is to identify the ways in which we are tempted to reason incorrectly. We reason incorrectly when the premises of an argument fails to support its conclusion. An argument of that sort may be called fallacious. So in a very general sense, any error in reasoning is called a fallacy. And fallacy plays a very vital role in this whole process of reasoning and argument. I hope you have understood this, and if you have any questions, please do let us know so that we can discuss before starting the new topic. And these are the recommended readings for you. I've also given you some handouts in the class. So try to give them a read, and if you cannot understand anything, just get back to me. Thank you very much. Until then, take care, and Allah Hafiz.